Everybody, welcome to the third talk in the series. We've nearly got enough money to pay for all the speakers, and we probably need like 12 more sign-ups, about £60.
Thanks. I'm Cameron. Like Dave, who spoke a couple of weeks ago, I've been around since about the beginning. Dave and two of his friends started this little club, and I was one of the ridiculous faculty members of the Department of Anthropology who said, yeah, we'll kind of say it's cool. And that grew into breaking convention because we thought to have a tiny little conference that grew all out of proportion. And now we're working on the third one. And we actually thought it'd be about 12 speakers, a couple of hours, and a bit of fun. Dave, the master networker, turned it into 3 conferences in one, and it keeps growing. So this has been around for quite a while, and it's thriving, even though there's been a lot of adversity into the Psychedelic Society. It kind of comes and goes and bumps and goes, but it's still surviving, and it's done that with very little hindrance from the university. And this is the great mystery of the thing. When Dave went over to the Union with his armor and weapons, ready to start this club, they said, oh, yeah, okay. And so I guess the time and the place were right. But this is the right place for it. I don't know if you guys realize this, but I believe it was David Allen who brought the LSD here from Paris into Sturry, and Sturry is kind of the first known recreational use of LSD in the UK. So just down the street, history. Hence Soft Machine, Robert Wyatt, and all those guys. Fantastic area for this. And it's one of those places that seems to keep drawing it down. It keeps going. So I used to work in the Department of Anthropology. I no longer do. It has nothing to do with my research interests, just other circumstantial things. I'd like to say, yeah, they kicked me out for it and feel like a hero, and Timothy Leary, sort of godlike ideas, but no, it's not at all. Other stuff going on. So they've been quite open and welcoming here in the University of Kent to these topics. My introduction and my ideas about psychedelics go back quite a long way. I was once a university student like many of you in this room. This was back in the Stone Age in Florida. And I used to like to eat lots of LSD. Until one day I was at Epcot Center and it completely broke my brain. And I have struggled since then. That was about 92, 93. I struggled with paranoia, particularly cannabis-induced, but sometimes persistent paranoia, till about 5 years ago. So 20 years of that. And so when I accidentally found Psychedelic Salon podcast, looking for psychedelic music podcasts, I almost just pitched it and said, nah, that's not what I'm looking for. But I looked at the titles, and I became extremely intrigued by what I was seeing. And so I decided to give it a listen, particularly the therapeutic uses of psychedelics, which I didn't really know anything about. And started talking about it to friends and family and other things, and somebody said, write an article about that. Do this. It sort of just grew of its own accord in me. And so I became particularly interested in the healing aspects. I'm a medical anthropologist, so these healing type things, a particular social healing or meaningful healing, is of deep interest. So I did this for a little while, grew some salvia divinorum, took it, and got rid of my paranoia. So I actively engaged in the healing aspects of psychedelics. And so since then, I've been talking quite a bit about healing aspects of psychedelics. And I felt for quite a while I've become quite unbalanced in that kind of a cheerleader for the good side. But there are bad sides to it, as I've experienced myself. But instead of just sort of condemning this as a bad side effect of a drug, I want to understand it a bit more. So this whole path is taking me through a bunch of different ideas and theoretical perspectives with very big, clunky names. But I'll go through some of them. In terms of healing, one of the most powerful ideas I found in terms of psychedelics healing is a concept developed by this guy in the 70s called salutogenesis. He wanted to know why, not why people who survived Auschwitz might be broken, but why the ones who weren't. Why weren't they broken? How could you survive something like that and go on to have a productive, decent life? And salutogenesis is just the opposite of pathogenesis. You've all heard of pathogens, right? They're what attack us and make us sick. Salutogens are the things that make us better. And so through a lot of sort of poking around and doing stuff, people are still researching this concept and these ideas. But what it comes down to is that salutogens, the most powerful ones, are simply thinking there's a bigger picture than you're aware of and that you're part of it. There's a story for you to fit into, and there's a plan. When you pull that apart, there's lots and lots and lots of definitions of what the mystical experience is, but it usually comes down to the unitary experience. I'm part of something bigger. I'm part of the one. And that there's a plan. I'm here for a reason. So the mystical experience seems to be tied into very strongly into this idea of healing from a psychosocial aspect. And this has very strong biological effects. People with high rates of salutogenesis, there's all kinds of little check mark boxes and things you can fill out, will have fewer heart attacks, will miss fewer days of work, are less likely to commit suicide or be murdered. I'm not sure how that works. I guess you don't go around pissing people off. But so there are some biological effects and various other stress diseases and whatnot. So this feeling that there's something bigger and feeling that there's a plan can actually make your body work better. Now, psychedelics, one of the things they do is induce a mystical experience. This is research by Roland Griffiths. He's gone through this whole thing at a consistent dose, usually about 5 grams, isn't it, roughly, psilocybin. You can induce these classic mystical experiences. So heavy doses of psychedelics make you feel like you're part of something that then there's a plan and can help you heal. And this might very well be behind much of the healing aspects. Much more complicated than that, and I've explored other biological and chemical aspects of this in other places. One of the most interesting things is, for all the shouts of bad trips out there, in clinical contexts, when you're in there in the hospital, some guys, this is okay, we're going to give you some psilocybin or MDMA or LSD or ayahuasca or whatever it is, but it's really okay because you're allowed to, and we got these doctors here to make sure you don't die. People don't have bad trips. There's also, in the traditional settings in various Amazonian contexts where they use them regularly, it's those types of contexts, the idea of a bad trip just doesn't really play. These ideas where you think you're dying or it kind of breaks you in a way. Why is that the case? What is different in those contexts than the street use? And there are bad trips. I went through one. I'm not going to lie, and I know other people who've had them. And I don't subscribe to the idea that a bad trip is just a good trip you don't fully understand. I think that's a bit of shaming of your experience from certain type of list bunnies. Anyway, the idea that gets behind this that I think causes some of these problems is exactly the opposite of salutogenesis, the things that make things break apart. Gregory Bateson, way back in the 30s, talked about something. He wasn't talking about psychedelics, but he was talking about something called schismogenesis, where schisms come from. And he really just wanted to know why the colonial enterprise didn't always work. Back in the 30s when colonialism was a good idea, apparently. But when colonial forces came into places and took over, sometimes the locals were cool, sometimes they fought back. And he was trying to find out what caused these schisms. And he came up with various ideas about it. And I'll talk about the specifics of this in a little bit. But particularly in terms of psychedelics, the things that cause schisms, the things that break you apart from the broader society in the use of psychedelics from broader society are primarily they're illegal. You are not one of us. That's what illegal means. You don't belong. You're doing something wrong. How much does this play on your psyche when you take psychedelics? Well, it's not just that it's illegal. You can kind of forget that, or you can feel safe. But I call this sort of the just because you're not you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not watching you clause. We are constantly told they are watching you and chasing you through the media. The most popular programs on television are police procedurals. We always catch some cops in particular, the real life action ones, where they're running around chasing people and with their billy clubs for entertainment value, and the fact that CCTV is all over the place. You are being watched, and you really don't ever forget this. So the illegality is telling you you are not part of the bigger society. That's undermining that being part of the bigger picture and belonging. The other problem is, and it's tangential to the illegality, where we are essentially an invisible population. We've come to this conference, this talk. We're members of the Psychedelic Society. We've met each other. But for the most part, and consistently when I was doing research on online forums, you get this idea, wow, I'm so glad I found this forum because I don't know anybody who does these things. Or I feel very alone. And this idea that we're invisible, that probably on every block in this country, there's somebody. I was shocked at the first Breaking convention how a transect of the audience, or the audience looked like a transect of any village or any city in the world. Old people, young people, men, women, people of various races, people who were very conservative, people who were very liberal, everything. It was shocking. And again, this is what every one of them said. We're so glad you've done this. I don't feel alone anymore. And so being alone, obviously, is being separated. And this separation creates what fancy anthropologists like to call anomie because of Emil Durkheim, but it's a particular psychological state which he attributed to, in its bigger senses, leading to suicide. He was studying why there was suicide. But this anomie, this separation, this depression, aloneness, but it's all tied up to this feeling that you're not part of something. It's quite the opposite of self-genesis. And so there is this schismogenic force being applied to those of us who choose, for whatever reason it is, to take illegal substances. Regardless of your personal experience of them not being as harmful as they tell you, your personal experience of them healing you, being medical, being spiritually intense, and all these things. There's still this social idea, and there is a big society versus us as a subculture. Okay. So, that's the core of where I'm going with this. So, kind of want to go through a little exploration of what psychedelics do, what I think they do. Dave spoke about all the different ideas of what psychedelics do, and how they've created various terminologies. I have just talked about that there's this mystical experience that they do, right? They create this mystical experience if you take a consistently high dose in the right context. But this is sort of a sometimes thing. And sometimes they're entheogens, they bring out religious ideas from inside. Sometimes they do a lot of things. But I think one of the things that they consistently do, at least they consistently do in me and many of the people I talk to, is this mind manifesting thing. And what is to manifest the mind? It's to sort of think about how we're thinking, to notice how our brain's working. I'm sure everybody here has had a bit of that experience. Hello? So, what does the mind do? What are we noticing when our mind manifests in front of us? Meaning. The human mind is a meaning-generating or receiving, depending on your philosophical tradition. But what we do is we imbue every damned thing around us full of meaning. Can't look around this room without words. Those colors all have words. These textures all have words. The people all have words. Everything has words attached to them. Words are meaning. They're abstracts we've created to describe the real world around us. So every word brings with it the meanings associated with it. Green. Green isn't just green. Green is the forest. Green is peaceful. Green is whatever it happens to mean to you. And so these things tumble and tumble and tumble and tumble in our brains every time we experience every tiny little bit of anything we experience. We will often, in cognitive work, talk about the way these things are chunked as prototypes, schema, and scripts. And this is how the meaning is applied. A prototype is the best example of something based on our experience of all the things of those things. So, yes, these are chairs. They may not be the prototypical chair, right? And every time we see a chair, we kind of assess whether or not how close it is to the perfect chair. Getting the Platonic ideas of the perfect this and the perfect that. But our brain seems to create this averaging of the ideal type of whatever it is. The ideal bird is very sparrow-like in Europe. When you get people to sort of map what a bird is, they describe sparrows more than they describe penguins, right? Penguin isn't a very normal bird, nor is an ostrich, yet they're perfectly birds. So these are prototypes. So every time we see something, we experience this comparison. And this comparison brings up what we call schemata. And this is the idea of what do you do with it? What is it for? Is a chair? Well, it's got a lot of things you can do for it. Usually it's for sitting. That's the prototype schema for a chair. What do you do when somebody's vending something? You get into a queue. That's actually more of a script. But it's the idea of what should be done and how it is. The ideals about it. All the sort of rules associated with things. The script is how you perform that. I want to put on my shoe. There's a script for tying the shoe, putting the shoe on, sitting perhaps before I put it on. Like me, try to do it standing up until you sit down. But all these things are meaning-rich aspects of our world that we exist in. And we can't avoid it. And of course, when we manifest our mind, when we start looking at what our mind's doing, we're seeing all this meaning flying at us. Wow, that's yellow for a reason. And we start noticing patterns. People use these things in very distinct patterns. I mean, at first, you start noticing patterns like the simple one, the way the bricks are laid out. I can't go into any tiled space without looking for the bigger pattern that they're trying to hide by using smaller patterns or non-patterns. So pattern finding. And so in this context of hyper-rich meaning, because the meaning becomes so obvious, and so in your face, the meaning ceases to be something to the effect of meaning to me. Start beginning to think that's meaning for me. That green's communicating to me something, which it is. But then you start, in some cases, not all, but say, they did that for me. They want me to think this. They want me to. We start applying these things to bigger pictures, like the media, or whatever else. We say, it's for me. Now, when we start misappropriating general meaning to personal meanings, funny things start happening. And this begins to look like conspiracies. There's a plan and a plot. I'm not saying there's no conspiracies. There's conspiracies everywhere. You and I are all engaged in a grand conspiracy to hopefully get people to think better things about psychedelics, or various other conspiracies we involved in. I'm involved in lots of conspiracies. Some of them with Dave over there. We're conspiring against our other breaking convention organizers to actually make a living doing this. I'm conspiring to keep my job. I'm conspiring, etc., etc. We're all conspiring. We're working with other people to achieve goals. And they're everywhere. But because we're starting to see these patterns in this meaning structure, and there is this motivated action, which we can call a conspiracy, we can look at these patterns and start seeing something that looks like a planned, organized, big picture. But I want to argue that these are actually emergent properties based on other smaller basic patterns. So, for example, if I get a little dish of water, and I put it on heat, an even heat source, it'll sort of kind of start popping up and down as it kind of gets hot and cold, but eventually it starts going in a torus shape. It goes up in the middle, down on the sides. Very intelligent patterning, but that doesn't mean the water molecules have a brain and they decided, hey, this is the best way to do it. Form a cube. It's an emergence property, a seemingly intelligent property based on a lot of little things trying to achieve the same goal. And what I'm saying, a lot of these things that look like the media as a big, huge, tentacled hungry ghost, or corporations, are rather a bunch of simple little games of a bunch of people of the same selfish capitalist society. And we all play it. I play it, you play it. I try not to play it. Some people revel with it. But we're trying to make a little bit more money for what we do. I'd like to get a raise. I try to do more or less good work, but still, I need money to survive. And the more money I have, the more status I have, and it's easy to get trapped into these little cycles. And a lot of people buy into it whole hog. I work with kids in schools. Every one of them buy into it completely. They will not be complete until they're driving $250,000 cars, pound cars that they will never, ever get. But a lot of people playing this selfish game, and it's a culture that tells us to be selfish. More and more, they're breaking up our social networks to make us be selfish. If you live with your entire family in the same place, I'm living with my whole family, it's a big family, I don't have a job, it's not such a big deal. I just start cleaning up around the house. We'll all eat, we'll be fine. I live thousands of miles from my family. I don't work. I can't find a job, no matter how menial. I starve because I don't have a social network supporting me. And the capitalist society has done this quite effectively. So you're forced to play the selfish game. You have no choice but to play the selfish game to survive. It makes small social networks, friendship networks, but they're not the same as something as deep as family. Dave and I might support each other for a couple of months. I ain't going much further than that. He ain't that pretty, nor am I. So, but when all these things come together, this little game that we're all sort of programmed to do, because it is our culture, it is the program under which we survive and have very little choice about engaging in, it looks like a bigger plan because it all comes together. Everybody's sort of doing the same thing. So it kind of grows in and of itself into a seemingly intelligent, emergent scenario. But that doesn't change the fact that there's some of us and there's them in terms of this particular grouping, but everywhere else. So I'd like to sort of go into a little track of how to avoid paranoid and conspiracy thinking and try to be a little bit more critical about the relationships we have with those outside of our community. That would be more productive, perhaps. First off, we'll start with the hippie thing. We are really one. We really are. I don't mean that in a spiritual sense, though in some ways I do, but we all share a culture. We all have the basic operating system. Unless we're in an entirely different culture, but you and I are in this room. We buy into this culture. So we're running the same program. In a lot of ways, we share the same reality tunnel, as Robert Anton Wilson would like to tell us. Reality is this huge, massive, crazy thing that nobody can see the whole thing. It cannot be simultaneously apprehended. So all we have is little tunnels throughout reality, kind of like an ant farm, our little ant farm in reality. And those of us that share this Western cosmopolitan culture do have similar motivations, similar desires, and similar fears. We can't really go too far from what our supposed political enemy can do as well. It's not that radical. We're not capable of it because we have the same operating system. Our motivations often are hedonistic, selfish. I want to have some fun. How's that any different from going out and drinking martinis at lunch in your business meeting? You know? I have had deep spiritual experiences on alcohol. You know, so it's all sort of there. We all have these same things. We may have various different, slightly different takes on it. Kind of like, you know, conservatives and liberals in the U.S., which are the same party. But people seem to perceive the differences as much more meaningful than they perhaps are if you stand back from it. Because of these reality tunnels that we get into, and we have a few little tunnels off to the side here, and they have some tunnels off to the side there, we find ourselves wrapped up in what anthropologists call ethnocentrism. My culture is right, your culture is wrong. The way we do things is the right way to do things. For instance, how many of you would rather have human milk in your tea? Makes more biological sense. There you go. We've got a radical over there. Ask that question at a school like I did just the other day at a mainstream school. The teachers start gagging. So the way we do things is right, and the way the others do things is wrong. And this gets twisted and changed. The people who are different from us must be evil. They're wrong. They're evil. They're up to something. And this happens on both sides. We accuse the media of being evil. We accuse corporations of being evil. They accuse crazy hippies of being evil. They're trying to undermine the whole fabric of our society. And in the terms of psychedelic sort of thinking and stuff, we got David Icke even calling them lizardmen, aliens. They are not even the same species of this as us. Now, this is not new. It's hundreds of years old, thousands of years old, millions of years old. The most recent one that had major effect was European anti-Semitism that led to the Nazis in gas chambers. Jews are different, and they must be killed because they're going to steal all our stuff. White people in the New World were crazy monsters that steal the children and melt their fats to run our machines. Like, yep. Find out what it does. But these have real effects, and we start projecting these alienness and evil onto somebody who happens to just be different. And we are doing that all the time. It's really hard not to. I, as a professional anti-ethnocentrism kind of a guy, as an anthropologist, have found myself doing that. Most recently, finding it quite fun to make fun of chavs. I have now worked and lived amongst them for a couple of years and realize I'm an asshole. So, but this is something that we do, this kind of projection of our fears on people who are different from ourselves. So what can we do about this? Well, we're the small guys. We are, the little society. And so it's us that have to open the dialogue with the bigger power. We can't just continue to say they are evil and try to dismiss them and actively fight them. It's not going to work. They literally have the guns. So we don't have the resources. We don't have the power. We have to be the big guy. And we have to make the bridges and make them as effectively as we can. The problem is when you disagree with somebody, then we come back to the schismogenesis. I promise you to come back to it. There are two sorts of ways that these schismogenic forces apply themselves. One is in the way of war of nations. I say something shit about you say something me, and you, me, and this is, I think it's balanced, excuse me, Genesis. But there's this force meets force type aspect. But there's just as much the sort of abused wife scenario where the aggressor comes in quite heavy-handed, and there's one that backs away, gives up everything, but then holds a huge grudge. Right? That's what it should. And we're doing this. We're doing this by saying, okay, you guys are wrong, your science is wrong, our science is right, your alcohol is wrong, my weed is right, all these sorts of things. I have a very, very lovely and amazing friend who will constantly say horrible things about people who use alcohol because they're obviously fucked up. They are, we are. It's just a choice. It's a different way of choosing to affect our mind. You know. And the other side is we kind of go away and hide. That's the other side of this. We'll hide our activities because we'll get arrested. They have the power. They will beat us into submission. So there's got to be a way to go in there and meet them in an engaging way, not fall back, but not have to just sort of smoke weed in their face or show up to court tripping or whatever it happens to be. And I think, even though it's not my favorite, or I think the most important use of psychedelics, but by far the most powerful in terms of dialogue are the clinical applications. Everybody knows somebody who has suffered from the traumas of cancer. End of life anxiety relief through psychedelics is potent to a lot of people. Lots of people have friends or family members with cluster headaches, which are the most horrible thing you can possibly imagine, and they alleviate them in some cases. It's a cure. Somebody who would never go for this might suggest, maybe I'll get some mushrooms for my kid and see if it works. And various other clinical applications. I think this very material aspect of psychedelics speaks to the very material aspect of a non-spiritual society. Modern cosmopolitan society is atheist, in the most part. It is, they like their material stuff. It's all about science. Not that science is everything, but it's a good inroad. This has worked with my family, my family's friends. My family and their friends are the most conservative people you've ever met. They are conservative Texans. They go beyond conservative. And they will listen to me because they know some of the stuff I'm talking about. After that, recreation. Recreational is great. Everybody likes to have a bit of fun. When you start talking, I do this. I'm got a PhD. I'm okay. Have fun when I do it. And then, ultimately, the spiritual. I think the spiritual is a very, very important aspect, but I think it's the least important to a broader secular society. But moving through the proper pieces, and when people digest the little bits and pieces as we move through it, as a community, talking to people we know, people we love, people who actually will listen to us for a few minutes, little bits like that, can help open it up slowly but surely. I'm hoping we're doing this with Breaking Convention, with its primarily scientific aspect, though I don't think any of us are actually, well, Ben, are so hardcore into the science realm. Ben, clinician, it's understandable. The rest of us understand the very strong value of that aspect of it for communication to the outside. And so, moving from the material to the numinous, slowly but surely, I think these little steps can become non-threatening areas that we can have dialogue. There is research that backs things up and these types of things. And so, ultimately, I'd like to finish with, we're psychonauts, and we need to be emissaries. We are political entities, every single one of us, who need to be emissaries from this little, tiny, weak country to an extremely belligerent and aggressive neighbor. We need to make them trust us and like us. It's our job, not theirs. That's it. Thanks. Please buy a membership to the society. I have. I had to pay the extra pound. That hurts. It hurts. Questions? Yeah.
You were talking about, or you alluded to at one point, that experience that you had affected you negatively for 15 years.
20.
Would you be able to elaborate particularly on that experience in reference to
Yeah.
you heightened your
Yes. Okay. My friends and I, fairly experienced psychonauts, decided to go to Epcot Center for spring break. We lived in Florida. And we, because Disney's weird, psychedelics. And we're having a very, very, very good time. And we went back to the car, had a bit of weed, and came back. What happened while we were in the car is it started to rain. Because it rained, Florida was sunny, nobody was prepared. People had to deal with the rain, so they went to the shop. Everybody, right there were millions of them around. And they became faceless, literally faceless robots, Cybermen, chasing me all over the park. I couldn't tell who was following me, who wasn't following me. They were. And I started losing it. And in fact, I started losing it on this ride called Communication. It's a big golf ball you see. But I was getting so deep, and I couldn't understand what it was talking. I was like, I can't even deal with communication. I can't communicate in communication. I'm losing it. I completely lost it. And the whole flavor of the thing over the next several hours, well, frankly, the next week or so, was they were chasing me. They were the authorities, and I was going to end up in prison. So my friends couldn't figure out what I would talk about because I wouldn't talk to them because everybody could hear our plans and plots trying to get away from them. And I would say something, and I'd say it too loud, and oh crap, we can't do that. And my friends would say, this guy's losing it. I did go to the Mexico display, which is a big inside pyramid. You go inside, it looks like you're in Mexico with sunset. No safe in Mexico. Being a Texas boy, Mexico's where you run away from. And I didn't want to leave Mexico. So we stayed there for a while. They never quite grasped what was going on with me. And I didn't want to leave this thing. And they were like really sick of just sitting there drinking Mexican beer. And so we went around the park. They finally decided we had to leave. And they were a bit pissed off because we left before the fireworks display, which was going to be one of the highlights of our enhanced sensory apparatus. We went back. I was convinced the car was bugged, so I wouldn't tell them where our hotel was. I saw a question mark on the road, and I knew the cops had put that up there to try to entice us down a mystery road to catch us. We stopped at Burger King, and there was an emergency in the building next door. There was actually a lot of blood. Really something nasty had happened over there. I thought they staged it to catch us. A very acute evening. And when we got back to the hotel room, I would only read out of the Gideon's Bible because the room was bugged and I didn't want them to know anything and I didn't want to slip up. My friends really put up with a lot of shit that night. For a week, I thought this was a real event that I'd just barely gotten away. And somebody called, I was at my uncle's house, called. My mom's maiden name is Cameron. My mom's brother. Is Dr. Cameron there? No, can I take a message? Oh, no, we'll call back. And I just went completely shit, they're coming. Stupidly went down to the grocery store, got a big jar of pickles and juice. Blood system. Went to pick up my friends to go back to university. And I happened to just randomly say, wow, it was really weird how they were chasing us to my buddy's little brother. He goes, that's what was fucking with you. Why didn't you say anything? We had told you it wasn't going on. But then after that, every time I engaged in anything stronger or more awareness enhancing than alcohol, the cops were fucking chasing me. In fact, I was sitting in a park bench. A police officer just happened to sit down at the next one at night. She was just doing her rounds. The floor did this and you're slightly too. I stopped, didn't do it. And this was the kind of stuff I dealt with low-grade paranoia after that. Over the course of that 20 years, if somebody was laughing near me, they were laughing at me. People were talking. I couldn't hear what they're doing. They were talking about me. I could tell myself, yes, this is just the paranoia, but it still affects you. So it was that police flavor. I had done something wrong, and I was going to get busted. That sat with me over that time. Not too long ago, after finding the psychedelic salon, like I said, I grew the salvia. I actively took it in the context of trying to deal with this. The reason salvia divinorum, it was legal at the time. I think it's still legal in this country. And so at least my key paranoid feature of I'm breaking the law and they're coming to get me would be undermined. And so, and it did. So about 90%. Hey, they came up most recently when Ofsted went after our school, and I thought I was going to be fired over something I said on Facebook. That wasn't fun. So, hope that answers your question in great, entertaining detail. Yep. No, I didn't see you. The one behind you first. Okay. Well, it's between you two then. Well, I don't think it created something that wasn't there. The question is whether that was part of me or was it part of the society I'm part of? And I am convinced it has more to do with the society I'm part of, telling me how wrong it is. Society doesn't tell me alcohol is wrong. I never feel paranoid. And various other substances. And so, yes, it's something that's in me that came out because of the enhancement and starting to look at the patterns. I see a bunch of people walking towards me because there's thousands of people there. Some will be walking towards you. They all look the same. I was noticing something real. My interpretations were through the lens, I have done something wrong.
Psychedelics kind of stabilized with years, but that kind of started to go down and a lot of the suggested culture surrounding psychedelics at the time were richer based on now we're kind of, you're right, it's still stigmatized and to a lesser extent, so it speaks to kind of the culture, but that's not really what I wanted to ask. So, because you were mentioning that kind of an inroad to talk about is to talk about therapy, which I find is kind of how I go about it too, especially with my parents who aren't certified, who when they heard about the end of life anxiety and those kind of things, that really kind of turned their attention onto it and became interested. But what I find is, because I'm in anthropology as well, and it's as psychedelics become more popular, there's kind of a tendency that I notice in anthropology to kind of start criticizing the biomedicalization of psychedelics. Yeah. And then I guess for me, kind of the issue is that, like, I don't know if kind of something that's so illegal in our society still kind of stigmatized should get into like this logical debate on possibilism. Right. You know what I mean around these things? Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I'll try to be politic about this. There are obviously big issues with limiting the world's perception to one aspect of something. So, I mean, you see it in the most pathological versions of ideas that all Muslims are terrorists, or, this essentializing aspect. And the biomedicalization is an essentializing act. You break it down to an essential idea, whether it's true or not. It's part of prejudice. So you say, this is something, that group is something, as opposed to acknowledging that every group has just as much variation as my own group has. Or the sort of anthropological sort of zinger is there are more differences within a culture than between cultures. So yeah, I agree to some degree that this has a backfiring possibility by overemphasizing one aspect and ignoring the other aspects. And in fact, I had hoped for Breaking Convention to have a multi-spectrum session on Ibogaine, talking about the cultural uses and the music and all that kind of stuff, not just the heroin cessation stuff, which is the only thing anybody ever hears about. Fortunately, nobody will talk. So they're secret keepers, the Ibogaine folk. But on the other hand, in a lot of ways, anthropologists are a bit precious. And I've been guilty of this myself. But we hate programs, say, like Tribe, because it turns a cultural practice or a group of people in part of the world into an entertainment product. It misrepresents them because you've got these cameras and this guy who's not a trained anthropologist going in there just mucking about. Unfortunately, we forget that people all over the world like to muck about. We're trying to, suddenly we're like, oh, all these people, they're very serious and they're so easily manipulated by us sophisticated Westerners. That's racism. The anthropologists are promoting their own racism through that kind of argument. But also, stuff like that actually builds the discipline. So some of this essentializing aspects bring people into it. And the people who come into it will look into the bigger picture and the more sophisticated aspects. But we can't expect the whole world to be sophisticated in a multimodal fashion. So you go with the little bits and pieces that capture their imaginations to bring them in. Physicists like Star Trek. Anthropologists hate Tribe. Physics has a lot more money going into it. It's sort of, we're happy to promote a silly version of ourselves. The best period for anthropology was when Margaret Mead was a huge public figure. That's when the most money and resources were dumped into the field. So, yeah, in terms of theoretical and broader understandings of society, I don't think anthropologists themselves should limit themselves to that. But I think in terms of projection to the rest of society, we need to understand the limits of sophistication in terms of anthropology of the general population. That's why we have degrees if they don't. Not to be so precious in our world. Mm-hmm. Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Well, I think, yeah. Would it be? Would we be special anymore?
Not necessarily that. Just like it's something that I don't know. I've always felt.
Yeah. You know, there's those types of things with any kind of society. I mean, you got the real ale guys who kind of were into this sort of stuff, and then there's still gonna be this. I'm more of a connoisseur. This is the type of thing I do. Not everybody who does psychedelics now likes festivals. You know, that's festival culture. It has a high representation of psychedelics used in particular types of festivals, not all of them. And so that just happens to be like going to a bar mitzvah and drinking wine. It's part of that society. And so it's, I think, really important to break away from the cult of substance. I try to avoid, Timmy and I were talking about this, but anything that tries to say one of these substances is this way, this other one is this way. I think they're subtle differences, but I think they're based on individual chemistry. I work well with Salvia divinorum. The vast majority of people I know have extremely horrible experiences on it. It's just my chemistry versus your chemistry. I don't think that's the nature of Salvia, and Salvia is some sort of crazy goddess that says, hey, you're okay, but everyone else isn't. Why? I'm just this dude. So, and that's that essentializing again, and it's reducing a full community to a substance they take, and I think that's a mistake.
Thanks very much, Cameron. I think we'll probably head upstairs for origin.
Sounds good. Yeah, please do, because this is a really special sort of situation.
That will be our slogan soon. Yeah, please. KC Psychedelics, please sign up.
I don't know how to work it. So.